In the middle of July, during those dog days of summer, the people of 125 years ago would take advantage of the late afternoon to go for a stroll down a quiet country road, or perhaps a buggy ride to catch the evening breezes. But for 70,000 young men encamped on the plains of Northern Virginia in July of 1861, there were no thoughts of leisurely walks or casual buggy rides. There were only thoughts of war. It was the beginning of the American Civil War, and for 30 million Americans, it was the beginning of a nightmare.
The Southern Confederacy wants to destroy this country, to split it down the middle, and we just can't allow that to happen.
I think a lot of the Federals are fighting for their flag and their country, but I honestly see it as an invasion on Virginia, and we just have no choice.
To the casual observer in 1860, the United States of America looked as though there was nothing in the world that could stop or even slow its phenomenal development. But beneath this placid facade of what appeared to be cooperative expansion, there lay the seeds of terrible conflict between the northern and southern sections of the country. In the north, where the conditions of terrain and climate were suitable, growth came in the areas of industry and population. The primarily agricultural South, on the other hand, devoted most of its land and energies to the raising of cash crops, and very little to the development of industry or transportation. There was one other difference between the two sections, and without doubt the most difficult to resolve: the existence in the South of slavery.
What is slavery? Is slavery having a piece of paper that says you own a man? Or is slavery keeping an Irish immigrant and his whole family working 14 hours a day in a sweat mill, making 25 cents a week less than it costs to live and in debt to the company store, and he can't leave the job until the company store is paid off? Now, what is slavery?
I believe it's wrong for any one human being to own another human being. The Bible teaches us that, and I thoroughly believe that.
It was not so much the existence of slavery that created dissension in the country, as it was the question of whether it should be allowed to expand beyond its present boundaries, and by how much. As territories petitioned to become new states, the question arose again and again. Each time, Daniel Webster of New England spoke with great power for the free state abolitionists, and John C. Calhoun eloquently argued on behalf of the supporters of slavery. Equally effective was Henry Clay of Kentucky, whose brilliant efforts at compromise kept the peace for 4 decades. When these 3 great men died in the early 1850s, their leadership went unreplaced. Not long afterwards, a new figure appeared on the political scene, and with his rise to prominence, the last hope for a peaceful solution died away forever. His name was Abraham Lincoln. He first attracted national attention during a highly publicized series of debates with Stephen Douglas in an unsuccessful bid for the Senate. As a result of this exposure, Lincoln gained widespread popular support in the North and became the new Republican Party's presidential candidate in 1860. Though he received only 40% of the popular vote, Lincoln collected enough electoral votes to defeat the Democrats, who were unable to unite behind a single candidate. Lincoln's election was the last straw for the South. Convinced now that an abolitionist president and a Congress dominated by Yankees could be only detrimental to Southern interests, the South decided to secede from the Union. South Carolina led the way in December of 1860, and within 2 months, 6 other states had followed. The United States was united no longer. The uneasy peace that followed was soon to be shattered by the events surrounding Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. South Carolina demanded the immediate surrender of the fort to the state, and the federal garrison steadfastly refused. Finally, on April the 12th, 1861, the batteries surrounding the fort opened fire. The damage done to the fort would soon be repaired, but the damage done to the country would be catastrophic. Now it was war. Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers to put down what he called the rebellion. This act promptly drove 4 more states into the Southern camp, refusing to bear arms against their sister states. Newly elected President of the Confederate States of America, Jefferson Davis responded with a call for 100,000 volunteers, and all over the land, militia units and private citizens rushed to join their respective colors. These men took with them an exuberant patriotism, an unshakable loyalty to their cause, and a complete ignorance of what war was all about. In their blind enthusiasm, these colorful parade ground soldiers believed that the whole business would be over in a short while.
Well, I can't give you the exact amount of time that's going to pass between now and the first time we meet them on the field of battle. But I can guarantee you that that's exactly how long this conflict is going to last, till the first time we meet them on the field of battle.
Maybe from what I see, we have a lot of good spirit here. I think we go out and maybe get this over by this weekend.
I'll be home to help the wife get the crops out of the field.
It'll be over in 10 weeks' time.
It could be over in a day or could go on a few months. I don't know.
The Federal volunteers converged on Washington, while the Confederates took up positions in northern Virginia near the railroad junction of Manassas. Another Southern army was stationed in the Shenandoah Valley. The 2 armies were within easy reach of each other via the Manassas Gap Railroad, a strategic fact that the Yankees failed to adequately protect themselves against. Mixed in with the thousands of volunteers in the Union Army were some regular Army troops, who had seen plenty of action on the frontier protecting the settlers from Indians. Their view of what was to come contrasted sharply with that of the volunteers.
Volunteers don't know anything about fighting. They think it's bandbox music, a couple of guys get killed, and that's it. Elmer Ellsworth got killed over in Alexandria, and everybody wants to avenge him. They don't know what's going to happen when we get out there, and I think they're going to be mighty scared. I'm more worried that they're going to run away, and I'll be left there alone. Personally, I think myself and my men are going to handle themselves very well. They know how to handle themselves in a battle situation. When we go into action, we'll be the savior of the Army. I guarantee you that.
The self-assured volunteers were not impressed by these sentiments, however, and convinced themselves that their opponents were no real threat.
They're a rabble. They certainly don't have the organization. They don't have certainly the ability to fight in a system of organized military fashion. I can't imagine they'll fight hard at all.
I don't think the Rebs will fight very hard at all. I think they're a bunch of amateurs. The upper crust, if you will, they don't have any that much fighting spirit.
I think the Yankees don't have the heart to fight it. I don't think they know how to fight. I think they're a bunch of shop boys and they don't know how to fight.
Right. The Yankees, they fight not good because we get our knives, they run like chickens.
Though these views had no basis in fact, they were widely believed, and in the prevailing atmosphere of adventure, the soldiers did their best to make what they perceived would be a short time in the Army as enjoyable as possible. Although neither side truly understood what it was the other side was fighting for, they suffered from no confusion about their own reasons for being in uniform, even if many had personal rather than idealistic reasons for taking up arms.
Well, I believe that we should save the Union. The country divided in half is not going to survive, and I thoroughly believe that our forefathers meant this to be a strong, united country, and I believe very thoroughly in that, and I'm willing to fight very hard for it.
I enlisted to fight this war to put down secession.
You know how a soldier likes his tobacco, and if this war lasts very long, good tobacco may be hard to get because you know all the best is grown down here at the South. But I expect once we get to Richmond, we'll have all the good, fine Virginia burley that we'll ever need.
My state seceded, and I felt my loyalties were with it. I enlisted because my country is being invaded.
Well, I've been fighting with Robideau Wheat, and as a filibuster in Nicaragua, ever since the War of Mexico and in Italy. So it was only natural that I should join him when our shores were attacked by the vile damn Yankees.
For both sides, the business of turning these private citizens into soldiers was a monumental task. The drill was constant, the time was short, and the officers' frustrations were many.
Ground! Ground! Palm! Going to the drill now.
Finally, under enormous political pressure, Lincoln ordered the Union armies south. With flags flying and spirits high, they set forth to end the rebellion in one brilliant stroke. The Federals marching south were under the command of Irwin McDowell. In the Shenandoah, aging General Robert Patterson was assigned to keep the rebels there, under Joseph Johnston, from reinforcing the Confederates at Manassas, who were led by the flamboyant hero of Fort Sumter, Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard. Patterson was too old and slow for this important task, however, as Johnston would soon demonstrate. The Federal march south was a sprawling and undisciplined affair, and after a week at a snail's pace, they finally reached the Confederate positions along a small stream called Bull Run. A brief but embarrassing skirmish at Blackburn's Ford sent the Yankees running, and McDowell pulled back to rethink his strategy. Oddly enough, both McDowell and Beauregard had evolved the same battle plan. Each decided to hold with his left flank and strike with his right. In a battle that was characterized by mistakes and errors in judgment on both sides, Beauregard was late in launching his attack, and McDowell almost caught him looking the other way. Beauregard had stretched his forces out along a 5-mile defensive line on the south side of Bull Run. Expecting McDowell's main attack to come at Blackburn's and Mitchell's fords, he had stationed half his army there. The other half was spread out, guarding other fords further up the stream. But he had left the ford at Sudley's Church unguarded, figuring the roads leading to it to be too twisting and tortuous to use. Another mistake. After the rebuff at Blackburn's Ford, McDowell decided to swing his right flank wide to the north and cross at the unguarded ford, while launching a diversionary attack at the stone bridge in the center. As the 1st Union brigades began to cross, Confederate signal corpsmen wigwagged a frantic message to the nearest Southern commander, Nathan Evans. "Look out, to your left. You are turned." Evans had only half a brigade with him, including a colorfully dressed unit who patterned their uniforms after the French Algerian zouaves. Recruited from the docks of New Orleans by a formidable soldier of fortune, Robideau Wheat, they called themselves Wheat's Tigers, and they would be among the first to go into battle this day. Leaving a few companies behind to hold the stone bridge, Evans turned and raced north with his tiny command to face this unexpected Yankee threat. The Union forces outnumbered Evans by a huge margin, but they failed to use their advantage, attacking with only one regiment at a time. This was another mistake, and one that would waste hundreds of lives. No one had ever commanded this number of troops before, and the lack of time to properly train in the tactics of large formations now took its toll. Evans' men were fighting fiercely in the face of overwhelming odds, although not all the men were equally committed to dying for their country.
No! You want me to shoot you? Anybody? You want me to shoot you? I'm going back to Norfolk! Get in that line now!
In a maneuver that had worked against peasant armies in South America, Wheat ordered his Tigers forward, 500 against 10,000, brandishing their bowie knives. But these were no peasants they faced now, and the charge cost the unit dearly. Colonel Wheat himself was grievously wounded. Yankees continued to pour into line, and the Confederate situation was becoming desperate. Reinforcements arrived under the command of Bernard B. and Francis Bartow. Though these troops took some pressure off Evans, 3 brigades could not hope to stand for long against 2 Yankee divisions. And a 3rd division was on the way, having forced their way over the Stone Bridge. In the vanguard of this new threat was the 2nd Wisconsin, whose gray uniforms confused the Confederates. By the time they realized the truth, their flank was turned. B., Bartow, and Evans knew that their time was up. They had successfully held up the Union advance for hours, outnumbered 3-1. But their defense was crumbling, and the object now was to extract their units safely and hope that the Confederate High Command had someone else to stop the Yankees with. The Confederates did indeed have someone. All throughout the previous day, Joe Johnston's army had been disembarking at Manassas Junction, having easily given old Patterson the slip in the valley. The first of these to arrive was a brigade under an eccentric professor of artillery from Virginia Military Institute, Thomas Jonathan Jackson. Jackson's men had moved towards the sound of the firing as the morning's battle had developed. They took up a defensive position on the reverse slope of the Henry House Hill. Word came back from the front that B., Bartow, and Evans were in full retreat, but Jackson did not budge from his position. General B., desperately trying to rally his men, pointed to Jackson and shouted, "There stands Jackson like a stone wall. Rally behind the Virginians." The professor would be, from that day forward into legend, Stonewall Jackson. Union forces paused as they approached Henry House Hill to reorganize and reform their formations. McDowell was on the scene, exuberant and convinced that one final push would carry the day. But the Confederates were also reorganizing, with more reinforcements arriving by the minute. As Beauregard shifted his troops, the Confederate artillery pounded the Federals, and Southern resistance stiffened. Major Barry, the Union artillery chief, ordered 2 regular Army batteries under Charles Griffin and James Ricketts into position on the Federal right. Their job was to soften up the rebel line in preparation for McDowell's big push. The 11th New York and the 14th Brooklyn, both Zouave units, were ordered to support the artillery, which was exposed and vulnerable to infantry attack on the crest of the hill. As these units arrived in position, they quickly came under fire from the Confederate line, and Jeb Stuart's 1st Virginia Cavalry attacked them savagely. The cavalry attack was beaten back, but the Zouaves were left badly shaken and demoralized and began to break up. The artillery was now dangerously exposed. At this point, one of Jackson's regiments, seeing an opportunity too good to pass up, disobeyed orders to hold their ground and surged forward to seize the Union guns. Because the Confederates wore blue uniforms, the Union gunners held their fire, thinking the rebels to be their own support troops. In minutes, the 33rd Virginia swarmed over the battery as Griffin's and Ricketts' men fled down the hill. It was this mistake that turned the tide of the battle. The next 2 hours were spent in numerous charges and countercharges, as each side tried to control the summit and the key artillery position. Time was on the Confederate side this day, as more and more of Johnston's troops were coming onto the field. McDowell's big push never materialized, and the battle was slipping away from him. His troops, too, were slipping away from him. They had fought well for amateur summer soldiers, but now many had simply had enough. Unable to save victory, officers now tried to merely save lives. The momentum had clearly shifted to the Confederates, and McDowell had little choice but to pull back. Some distance from the field, a group of civilians had gathered. Mostly politicians, their families, and curiosity seekers from Washington, they had brought their picnic lunches and were enthusiastically awaiting what they all thought would be a grand display of federal military prowess. Now they began to notice an ever-increasing stream of demoralized and even panicked soldiers coming from the direction of the fighting. They were worried at first, and then frightened by this unexpected development. The sight of McDowell heading for the rear did nothing to alleviate their fears. They quickly boarded their buggies and hastily departed. Back on Henry House Hill, the Union line had dissolved completely. As a group, the Army turned and headed for home. McDowell ordered the regulars to cover the retreat, and they performed this duty professionally.
I'm more worried that they're going to run away, and I'll be left there alone. When we go into action, we'll be the savior of the Army. I guarantee you that.
The action of the regulars permitted most of the Union soldiers to escape, although for many men on both sides, there was no escape from death.
Good tobacco may be hard to get because, you know, all the best is grown down here at the South. But I expect once we get to Richmond, we'll have all the good, fine Virginia burley that we'll ever need.
McDowell's army was now little better than a mob. Beaten and demoralized, they trudged through the dust 20 miles back to Washington. There were no banners snapping in the breeze now, no bands playing, no boasts of quick and easy victory. This would not be such a short war after all. The Confederates pursued for a short distance, and their joy was unrestrained. But they were just as exhausted and disorganized by victory as the Yankees were by defeat, and Beauregard and Johnston agreed to settle for the victory they had. The sorrow that would lay across the land 4 years from now could not be imagined by either side, although both now realized the magnitude of what they had embarked upon. They were committed to the fullest measure. There could be no turning back. And whether they stood in the light of victory or stumbled in the gloom of defeat, the men of both sides shared a common determination to see the thing played out or die in the attempt.